Hey, welcome back to I Own a Business. I am Dr. Steve Vargo, and this is going to be a first. I'm going to open up with a riddle today. And here's the riddle. What's something that practice owners are surrounded by, but they ignore most of it? Practice data. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to shine a spotlight on data and metrics, and we're going to talk about how you can use data to help guide decisions and enhance practice growth. And to help me do that, I have with me Cathy Firman, who is Senior Director of Customer Success for GPN, the company that brought you Edge Pro that many of you use in your practice. So, welcome, Cathy.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Vargo. Glad to be here.
Great to have you here. And just for the sake of the listeners, if you don't mind, just give a little bit of background on you and your role with GPN.
Yeah, so I started my career at GPN in 2018 as the Assistant Customer Care Manager. I am currently now, as you said, over the customer success team and mainly the practice performance side of that, which includes our training and education, enterprise support, and data integrity. But my career in optometry actually began in 2003 when I started as a optometric. And through the years, I became certified as a optometric technician. And I became the practice and optical manager at the former practice I worked in. And that is where I was introduced to Edge Pro and have definitely been a champion for data analytics ever since then.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have you on because not everybody is a champion for data. So I had to search and we found you. So so glad you're here. And I alluded to it before, but on that topic of decision making, because I think data is so important to help us make better decisions. And I think a lot of ODs tend to be more reactive
Mhm.
when it comes to decision making. And instead of anticipating, we wait and then we react. So, from your perspective, how can data help an optometry practice move from more of that reactive decision making to more what we might call proactive growth strategies?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. A lot of doctors do that just reactive decision making. And so what I love about data is it gives you the facts instead of making those just gut reactionary decisions. So one thing that is kind of unique about what's kind of interesting about optometry, back to they're surrounded by data. Well, they're surrounded by data in the exam room and they use that. So think about like to determine the health of the eye and how they're going to treat it, right? So we look at intraocular pressure. We're looking at cup to disc ratio. And this allows the doctors to really make factual decisions on treatment plans for their patients. But they don't do that for their practice. So it is kind of interesting that they don't do that. So we really want to do this for their offices. And so we don't make those gut decisions to feel like, oh, well, I really like this frame rep, so I'm going to bring in their frame brand. Well, does that really correlate with the demographics of the patients that are coming into your office? Is their staff really performing well? I will say that kind of happened in our office. Our doctor wanted to let someone go because he thought they weren't performing. But when we looked at the data, they were actually performing higher than a lot of our other opticians were. So, you might be missing out on something and not realizing it by making those, reactive decisions in the office.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we do is we tend to rely on feelings when we don't have the data, and feelings can be wrong. And to your
Correct.
point, you would never go, I feel like you might have glaucoma, so we're going to prescribe. You just wouldn't
Exactly.
do it. You'd look at the data. So I actually want to circle back to that in a little bit, but I am curious on so GPN, great software. We've used it with iDoc members for years. It tracks a lot of data, like a lot of data management systems of any sort do. It's a it's fair to say it's an overwhelming amount of information, but I think what Edge Pro does really well is it helps sort of consolidate that and streamline it. So without that, I think there's a certain level of, is it analysis paralysis or paralysis analysis? I always flip-flop those two. I just covered them both right
That's
there.
okay. Yeah, you kind of did.
I
I
covered.
think it's a little bit of analysis paralysis. So it's very interesting that whenever I talk with analytics to doctors, even like you said, members who have it and people who actually have the product, and we ask, well, how are you doing? And they're like, well, I don't know. I don't log in, and I don't know if they're scared. So I'm going to kind of correlate this back to our health. Sorry, I'm going to kind of throw my husband under the bus here for a second. I'm trying to get him to go to the doctor to say, hey, you need to get your blood pressure checked. We need to kind of, check everything out to make sure you're healthy. Oh, it's fine. It'll be fine. And so they just ignore it because they think, oh, everything's not, the wheels aren't falling off the bus, so everything's good. So I don't need to go look at this number or evaluate it, right? And we go back to our patients. We tell our patients, you need to have an eye exam every year to check the health of your eye. Well, why aren't we checking the health of our practice on a regular basis, just to see where we are at? How many times have doctors talked about patient comes in and I keep going back to the glaucoma example because it's a great one, pressures are in the 30s. And it's been that way for a long time, but because there was no vision loss, the patients didn't come in. And then you get to the point where, oh no, things are not going well. We really need to you're scrambling to try and help save that vision. Kind of with the practice, if you aren't looking at those numbers, you're scrambling to try and save your business so you don't have to close those doors.
Do you have any metrics, maybe on a macro level, that you would
Mhm.
place at the top? I mean, if I were to say, Cathy Firman, what's your top three favorite metrics to
Yeah.
track? Because that's where I was going before, was that there's so many numbers we could look at, and that's maybe where the analysis paralysis comes from, is we don't know really where to focus our attention. But when you look at practices that do track data or maybe are successful with it in utilizing data, what would you say are some of the most important metrics to track?
Yeah, so I would say some of the important ones. The first one that always comes to my mind is your average revenue per exam. The reason why is it correlates back to kind of being the heartbeat of your practice. So just kind of like the heartbeat, your heartbeat lets you know how your body is doing healthy wise, right? You have a resting heartbeat, things like that. You know how your health is doing. Practice owners need to really know how things are going in their practice. So, and it lets you know if not just the money coming in, but also maybe procedures or operations that might need improvement within your office or if there is a change. So, for example, let's say the practice decides that they're going to change their doctor to optician handoff. So, if they start evaluating the revenue per exam, they will actually see, oh, is this new process working? And based on whether there's an increase or decrease of this metric, right? And this really lets the practice know the value of that exam being seen within that business. I know the doctor I worked for would always look at that number on a daily basis, and then if for some reason there was vacation coming up, things like that for him where we weren't seeing as many exams, he would say, okay, how can we get this number up so I can maybe take an extra day or two off for vacation, right? So it just really, you really want to kind of analyze that on a regular basis. And I think the other one that really comes to mind too is, your patient owned frame usage. This is one I think a lot of doctors really don't look at and don't think about. So the practice doesn't realize they're leaving money on the table when the patients are just doing a lens only sale, especially when there's an insurance contribution. So, and if so, let's say the patient has an average overage of $100 that they're paying for frames. And if the practice does 20 less of those a month, then that's an extra $2,000 more that practice is making. And so I think that's the other thing is we look at the numbers, but we don't do the calculations in our mind to say, oh, what money am I leaving on the table? And then try to figure out and address that to make a plan of action.
Yeah, revenue per patient has forever been one of my favorite numbers because it speaks to the individual patient. And
Mhm.
uh, there's been a lot of conversations I had with doctor owners who will say, my associate isn't producing where I'm at. And maybe the associate says, well, I'm not seeing as many patients, or but the revenue per patient kind of balances that out. It's how effective are you in the exam room with that patient in terms of communicating, in terms of being able to effectively communicate the value of the products and services, and that translates into everything else. So it's a great number to look at. I also think when you have multiple ODs in a practice, it's a great way
Mhm.
to assess how everyone is doing, because we could look at national data, right, around revenue per patient. That doesn't always necessarily reflect every individual practice, but you can safely say, well, if my revenue per patient is X,
Mhm.
And we're seeing pretty much the same population pool. There's exceptions to this. Let's say one
Yeah.
doctor is doing all the vision therapy. I got it. But it balances things out. So we kind of know where do we need to make improvements. And
Yeah.
the same thing with EdgePro. I know it's very optical based and it allows you to see through the data that you guys have variances even among opticians, which is really important to look at too, because I don't know if doctors really break it down into that nuance, do they?
Not that I've seen. I haven't seen the doctors, like you said, break it down into, how their opticians are performing or their staff is performing. So that is definitely an important thing to do. One thing I would do in the office is on a weekly basis, I would print out our staff compare matrix and actually post it to the bulletin board, kind of highlight the people that were, like those rock star individuals, like try to highlight a key area for each individual in the office. But also if you see something that's, not performing well, having those conversations, to find out what's happening, but also thinking about your rock stars, how are they doing it? What presentation do they have that they're doing an amazing job, And so just trying to get that standardization in the optical as well is really important.
Yeah, and it goes back to the doctor who didn't know the one employee that their productivity was where it was.
Mhm.
But it also, I like that point too, because I think sometimes we will look at that scenario and say, this optician is not performing anywhere near, the other optician, and we want to sort of either coach or mentor or punish the optician that's
Yes.
underperforming. But
Yeah.
another way of looking at it is what is the rock star optician doing better? And could we train that? Could we teach that? And I think sometimes doctors, managers even take a bit of a overly passive approach to that and just sort of expect the underperformer to be doing what the rock star is doing instead of actually coaching them or getting that rock star to share their best practices. What are they doing differently? And is that something that's transferable to the rest of the team?
Yeah, 100%. And it's also important to take the time to do that too. We're so busy in the office and practices. A lot of doctors are like, well, I don't have time to do this staff training. Well, just take maybe 10 minutes in the morning or if you have a meeting time, meeting during the week or monthly, take some time during that meeting and actually do some just in-house training. And of course, there's amazing reps and as well, for your frame and lenses and bring them in house and help them train as well. I mean, there's so many different resources out there now. I mean, to be honest, there's even ChatGPT. Just throw it in ChatGPT and say, hey,
Mhm.
like, ask questions there. So there's lots of information out there to help.
Yeah, Kathy, we talked already about the feelings factor, and I think data, and I'm sure we're aligned on this. It's one of the most important factors, if not the most important factor, in identifying trends and opportunities. Because without it, we tend to rely on feelings, and our feelings are often biased and incorrect. And data really doesn't have feelings. It is what it is, and it tells you the true story. And some practices may be doing great in this area, but it's an opportunity there's usually opportunities to improve in this area as well. So any real world examples you've seen of practices that have uncovered new opportunities through a better assessment of the data that they have?
Yeah, so there are definitely tons of examples out there. The one that probably sticks in my mind and the most is there was a practice owner who just reached out to us and he said, hey, I don't understand. Why are my contact lens sales going down? Like, I don't understand. I feel like, I'm doing all these fits. Why are my sales going down? And I feel like we automatically go to, oh, it's because your patients are buying online. And so we actually met with him, our practice performance team met with him and started doing some, discussion to kind of understand. And looking at the data, we saw a majority of his contact lens sales were actually single vision products. He was selling, the single vision or toric products. And so then we went and said, well, let's take a look at your demographic and age ranges of the patients you're seeing for your exams. And what we uncovered was the fact that a majority of his patients were 45 and up. And so what was happening, he was missing out on that untapped market within his own business because he wasn't fitting multifocal contacts for his patients. And it was like the light bulb went off in his mind. He was like, he didn't realize he wasn't really fitting those contacts. He was just thinking, oh, I'm doing all these fits and people aren't buying contacts. But as we know, sometimes patients with contacts, if it's not a multifocal, they don't want to have to keep putting on readers. So they might just go back to their glasses and, of course, not buy any contacts anymore. Right. And so I think that was a really an aha moment for him.
It's a great example. And I think it also gives you an opportunity to look at where do we need to set goals. Because when
Hmm.
you understand what the issue is, and again, going back to not over relying on your feelings, which contact lenses, it's easy to say things like, well, people just want to go online and order them,
Yeah.
or people don't want to spend the money versus looking at data and seeing what actually, what story does the data tell? But then
Mhm.
also be able to set goals around that that perhaps you could set for your team and say, we are struggling in this area. So for the next quarter, this is where we're going to put our focus.
Yeah. And I love that you said for the next quarter. I think that's another hiccup that happens is when doctors start using KPIs, they just want to they're like they just want to do all of them. And then what happens is not only do you get overwhelmed as the practice owner but also your staff gets overwhelmed. And so it's really important to just pick, two or three, KPIs to prioritize within the office, focus on those for that quarter, and then add as you go along. So that's one thing that we did in our office. We would actually have a KPI that we would each area would track for about 6 to 8 weeks. And we did kind of little contests within the office, and so we each have one. Then we actually had a break of not having to kind of focus on that KPI, because I think that's also important as well. What happens is, if the doctors are and the practice owners are constantly talking about, we need to improve KPIs, you're not giving your staff time to breathe. And you've got to give them time to breathe, to be like, okay, now I can, kind of maybe not be as, stressed. And man, that's not the best word, but, like kind of focusing on that KPI. What we did find though is once that KPI went up, it never went down to where it started. So will it drop? Possibly, right? Because it might not be kind of that main focus, but it's not going to go down to where it was. And it's because you have put in those processes and those scripts talking with the patients about the, certain add-ons, and, your handoff has now gotten kind of, streamlined, whatever it may be that you're doing in the office, and they just don't go back to where they used to be. So I think that's important as well.
I think you just highlighted one of I think the best advantages of setting goals. It's not just dangling a carrot for your team and
Mhm.
saying, well, if this number goes up, then everybody gets a bonus, but not providing any clarity around what they need to do, but rather a process of learning.
Yeah.
Where are we deficient? Where are we experiencing a weakness? And back to the topic here, what is the data showing? And then learning, doing things differently, trying new things, learning what works and what doesn't, meeting with your team, getting that feedback. And a great point that the longer you do something, the more likely it is to stick. It becomes habitual. Change is hard in the beginning, but it's only something new for a while. And eventually it becomes the new normal. And if you can continuously do that on small scale, we're not asking you to completely overhaul things, but I think the practices that go on to probably experience a higher level of success, they're constantly iterating, experimenting, trying new things, and keeping the things that work. I think that's how you continue to get ahead. Um, I'd like to dive briefly into the complex, convoluted world of vision plans that confuse, just baffle all of us.
Yes.
A lot of practice owners accept vision plans
Mhm.
without really knowing their profitability.
Mhm.
So, from your perspective and experience, how can ODs evaluate which plans make sense and which ones might be holding them back?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because we do get that a lot. We do get the question of, I'm thinking about dropping a plan. What should I do? So, you always want to take a look at the numbers, and make sure you're making the right decision for your office. So the first thing I would say, it's important to evaluate not just the money coming in for that exam, or for that insurance or vision care plan, but also the percentage of the revenue that's coming in, along with the percentage of the exams being seen. So just like the revenue per exam helps insight into the practice's health, it does the same thing when analyzing the vision care plans. So if the revenue per exam is low, or if, let's say, 20% of your exams are generating only 88% of your revenue, then it might be time to evaluate if there's a way to first improve the revenue. So I always recommend, before you start dropping anything, is there a way to improve the revenue, right? Because maybe there's a process that needs to be improved upon or something like that. But if that's not the case and the revenue is still down, then you might want to consider dropping it. Now, we did not actually drop a plan in our office. I actually have a situation where we were able to evaluate some vision care plans. So what happened at my former practice, when Florida actually passed a law in 2016 that restricted vision care plans from limiting the choice of lab suppliers. So we were able to still be contracted with the vision plan, but use our own lab. So we were super excited about that. So what we did is we decided to opt out of using the required labs for a couple of our vision care plans that had kind of that low revenue and also some low lab quality work. So we started doing that in the following quarter after we opted out of using the labs and started using our own labs. We found that we actually had an increase of about $20 to $30 per exam for the vision plans. And we also made sure to be strategic and kept our cost of goods low by using our stock lenses or house brand lenses where possible as well. So it was kind of a win-win across the board where we increased revenue, but we also had better lab quality work as well. So it was a nice thing to happen in Florida in our office.
And the vision plan scenario is definitely something that if you don't know the numbers behind it can be subject back to what we were talking about before, feelings, right? We've
Yeah.
worked with some practices that said, "Oh, I have to drop this plan because it's terrible and it only reimburses this amount." But when we actually broke it down to the total spend per patient,
Mhm.
it still wasn't great, but it was a lot better than what they thought it was. So they were able to make more accurate
Mhm.
um, decisions, better informed decisions, I should say, around whether it made sense for them to drop that plan or not.
Yeah.
So, um, how were things differently if you're listening to this and you're in a multi-location practice?
Mhm.
If it's, I can, I think we can safely say it's easier to get your um, get your mind around or get your hands around data on one location. But once we've got two, three locations or more, is that something that you would say it would be best to break down individually? Not every location is going to have the same level of production. It gets more complicated. Any insights on that for our multiple location owners?
Yeah. So definitely when you have multiple locations, I mean, KPIs are important no matter if you have one location or multiple locations. I will say that with your multiple locations, you really need to make sure you're evaluating standardized metrics and looking and comparing apples to apples, right? So to your point, you really want to look at those averages or those percentages or break down, by exam because if you're just looking at that high level revenue or collections that's coming in, that really doesn't give you a true understanding of how that office is doing. And then so back to, I think the average revenue per exam is a great one to track for those multi locations. Another great one is the capture rate to kind of see as your patients walking with their prescriptions. The other thing is if there's a huge discrepancy in metrics, you need to figure out what is happening too, because you also have different staff at these locations. And so thinking about how you can do that in just a single location and have, that rock star train, right? Your other staff there, do the same thing in multi-location practices. If you find out that maybe there's a high percentage of AR or photochromics at one location, find out what is working there and put that process or, that script in all your locations. And then another metric that is really useful as well is your collections per OD hour, or I mean, or your chair cost. So this helps you kind of understand the scheduling is doing for those locations. If you have a high no-show rate, maybe our recalls maybe not being as efficient as they should be if you have a low number there. So I mean, there's lots of different metrics, but like I said, I think going back to that standardization of your averages and percentages to compare across the board is the most important.
If we take two extremes, one being the doctor, the practice that just really doesn't pay any attention to the numbers, the other being sort of the complete open book, the game of business philosophy, right? And then everything in between. But I assume that we'd be aligned on this, that it's important. It's going to vary from one practice to the next, but sharing some data with the staff that they understand, that's simple for them, something that they can track and that they can see their progress and they can see the North Star, right? We don't want to give them 75 different metrics to track, but we've talked about some of the key ones. How do you build that into the culture, though? I mean, is that something that just over time comes down from leadership, shining a spotlight on data that needs to be tracked? Because I don't know if most staff and most practices could really tell you what's going on with the metrics, but I think it's important for them to be able to most effectively do their job that they know some of these things.
Yeah, I 100%. So to your point, yes, it definitely starts from the top down. And I would say that's what I loved about, the doctor I worked for. He was a big proponent of the game of business. So I love that you even brought that up. So he was very open book in regards to his data, right? Like I think that's what scares ODs. They say, well, if I show them the data in Edge Pro, then they're going to know how the business is doing. They don't know how the business is doing. They don't know the bills that are having to be paid. They don't know what your overhead is for your payroll, right? And to be transparent as well, they have all that information also in your practice management system in the report. So they have access to it. They just don't have the easy like evaluation of it, right? That Edge Pro provides. So, it is definitely important to share that information out. I think it's also important to make people kind of key um, individuals to report those KPIs. So, whether that be at a staff meeting or at just maybe just putting it on a board every day, whatever it may be, find individuals to say, hey, I want you to be responsible for this KPI to report back to the team, every meeting, whatever it may be. So I think kind of giving them a little bit of ownership and responsibility as well. And even take it a little further. Your staff is smart. They really are. And so even saying, hey, thanks for that KPI. Like I'm kind of seeing a trend. Maybe we're going a little bit down. Do me a favor and bring back to the table some ideas we can do to improve it. Right. And so because they are living and breathing it within, seeing the patients and within the day-to-day operations and processes within the office. And I think having a little fun competition. We were fortunate enough in our office, we had our associate OD who was big into crafts. So, she would actually make charts for us, and we'd have like little avatars we could move right on the little board, like how we were doing and things like that. So that was always fun and stuff like that to kind of have that and post those things, in kind of the break room and stuff like that. So you could kind of see how you're performing and stuff within the office too.
Yeah, I love that. I took a leadership course years ago by Franklin Covey, and that was something they really stressed. I think they called it a scoreboard.
Yeah.
And so you could have that however you want. You could have the thermometer thing where it shows
Mhm.
progress as you're going along. But I love what you said about ownership, because in my perfect world, the this is how I think outcomes improve. This is how I think we see progress. Is I've always seen the owner is sort of the CEO. That's always been our philosophy, the visionary, right? And if I were to ask you, what is your vision for the practice, and you don't have one, I would say find one, because that's your North Star, right? But being able to communicate that to the team and clarify that, and then looking to them to help support that, not dictating everything on here's what you need to do. There's a little bit of that, but I really like the approach of creating some autonomy among the staff and saying, here's where we're trying to go. Let me hear your ideas and let people own those ideas. But we need the data too to support it. And I love giving them, it might be just one metric that they're
Yeah.
tracking, that that front desk receptionist is tracking, or the optician, and they report back to you. Maybe it's once a quarter. And
Mhm.
is that number moving? Are we having an impact? And if we are, great, we know we're making progress. It's not a feeling anymore. If we're not, let's find out why. And it could be a variety of reasons. It could be because we're not executing on the plan. It
Mhm.
could be because there's other factors that have come up that we hadn't considered, but it's a chance to revisit that conversation. So data supports it. And again, the data doesn't have feelings. It just it is what it is, but it tells the true story. Um, and I really appreciate your time. I think we made numbers fun today. I didn't know if
I
we
hope
could.
so.
I think we
I hope
made
we
numbers fun. I didn't know that was possible, but
hopefully we got some more champions of data after this too, because like I said, data is very important, and and we have it in our everyday lives. And like I said, it definitely astonishes me that ODs are surrounded by data to help the health of the eye of their patients, but then they don't use it in their for their practice. And so you should take that philosophy for the health of the eye and put that into your business, and you're going to see it skyrocket.
it's a great analogy and it makes a lot of sense. So, Kathy, so thank you so much for your time. Where can people find out more about GPN?
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about GPN, you can go to our website, gpntechnologies.com. So that's a great way to find out more information about us.
Perfect. Yeah. You guys have been great. You guys, we've worked closely with you guys for years and a lot of happy members, and we're going to keep pushing them to look closer at that data. So,
Mhm.
Kathy, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Virgo. Have a great day.